Hello and welcome to 21st Century Vitalism. This here is a podcast exploring how we can best maintain a sense of energy, inspiration, and wakefulness while dealing with the absolute crazy circumstances of our modern day and age. My name is Brett. I'm going to be your host on this journey. We're going to talk to a variety of different people who are all representing different worldviews and practices that I think are relevant for helping you keep your butt in the saddle of your life. Which brings us to today's episode. In it, we're going to be traveling to the East to ask the question, what are these Taoist internal arts all about? And are they relevant to my modern life? If they are, how can I get started? And what might that path look like? Will I need a teacher? What the heck is Qi and this Dan Tian that I hear so much about? Well, if you haven't heard about it, then you might be in the wrong circles. Luckily for us, to help guide us into this rich and profound bed of teachings and practices is my new friend, Damo Mitchell. For the uninitiated, Damo is the head of Lotus Nei Gong International, which is an esteemed school which teaches martial arts, Nei Gong, today's episode, Qi Gong, and meditation. Damo started the school back in 2004 after a lifetime of studying across the world with a variety of different teachers. Having grown up in a family of practitioners and beginning his martial arts career very early in life, Damo has an excellent grasp of the material and does an amazing job at guiding us into the waters of this often topsy-turvy world. So that's what we're going to be talking about today, everybody. If you want to plug into Damo's platform beyond this episode, head on over to lotusneigong.com. He has virtual teachings. You can get started on this in your home. That's amazing. The internet's great. If you want to support this show, you can head on over to Apple Podcasts, leave us a review. You can do the same on Spotify now, which I didn't know before. You can sign up at Patreon at patreon.com/21st Century Vitalism. Subscribe on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, all the things on social media. I am there. If you just meet me there, it helps, and I really appreciate it. I see every one of you, and I send you beams of love. So I really appreciate each and every one of you for listening to the show. I am just so excited to be doing this and to be having amazing people such as Damo on. Really, it is just such a treat. So without further ado, please sit back, do some stretches, maybe drink some tea, and open your hearts for Damo Mitchell. Awesome. So the train has now left the station. Damo, hello. Welcome to the show. I just want to start by saying thank you. I know you're incredibly busy with your school and with moving, so I really appreciate your attention and your energy. Thanks for coming on.
No, thank you very much. Thanks for having me here. And as I said before we started recording, you actually you give me a break from moving house, which is really good, and you got me out of an awkward social dinner, so that's an added bonus as well. So yeah, I'm all yours.
I love it. Yes. All right. Well, let's make sure you don't have to go late. So, I was just doing a bit of research into your background. I've been kind of looking into your videos, reading your Instagram posts, and I took the time to go through your story of how you got to be a founder of an international school. And I have to say, you have a very rich and diverse background for all the practices that you do. You've traveled
Mhm.
all over the world. You've studied with tons of different teachers who are all exemplars of their field. And I'm just kind of curious, what was the inciting incident that got you to dedicate your whole life to studying and practicing the energy arts of the East?
Yeah, sure. I certainly did train with some very, as you say, exemplary teachers. That's for sure, and still do. But I also trained with a lot who were dead ends as well. I think that's also a major part of the journey for me, is that I had leads, but I also had a lot of dead ends, and I think that's been almost it's been as time consuming as the roads that were positive for me go down as well. So I think that I think it's important to note as well that anybody that does go down this route who takes that much time, you are going to go down those dead ends, and that's a part of the training too. So I certainly don't want to pretend that my journey has all been amazing. Definitely not. But I started because I started with martial arts when I was a kid, like lots of kids do. I started with my parents originally, and then essentially I was introduced to a couple of characters, a couple of people that were highly attained at what they did. And I guess it was their example that made me realize that this is what I wanted to do with my life. So it wasn't the system per se. It was a couple of individuals that I met that inspired me to essentially dedicate my life to these arts, because they had achieved things above and beyond what I'd encountered before, and certainly stuff beyond the material. And that was the eye-opening thing for me. And that's what really turned me into a fanatic, I should say.
So, what were some of those qualities or experiences that you had that were like, oh, like I really want to dive into this more?
Well, I was just a horribly, what would you say, closed-minded individual when I was younger, I suppose, as much as anything else. If I couldn't eat it, hit it, or whatever, I didn't really, I wasn't really interested. I didn't think it was real. So obviously martial arts for me were a very sort of raw physical practice as much as anything. So I was quite closed-minded, I suppose. And then I was a very angry individual when I was younger as well, very frustrated, very annoyed, generally at everything, which I suppose with hindsight was anger at myself, of course, but it's easier to express it outwards than face the fact that you don't like yourself very much. So that was kind of like a feeling that was always there. So the first time I ever walked into the space or was in the presence of a teacher that had touched soul or spirit, for want if you want it, whatever you want to call it, as soon as I stepped into the space of their aura and then experienced all of that anger and that frustration just fading away, and all of the things that I felt made me strong, all of the protection I built around myself and this fragile little sort of structure of strength I'd built in my mind, all just eradicated as soon as I was in their presence, and left with, for the first time in my life, bliss, really, I suppose. So that was the initiator. So as soon as I was within their presence, I recognized, okay, this is someone who, through simply being in the room with me, is able to completely disarm me and destroy everything I built around myself. That was it. And I was already a bit amazed. And then as I spent time with them and I got to see what they were capable of doing and their comprehension of reality and the way they could bend energy around themselves, I mean, once you've seen that, which is quite rare, I think, for people to experience, how can you not dedicate your life to it, was the conclusion I came to. So then a few times in my life, actually, I tried to step away from it. I was like, right, this is silly. Everyone's telling me to get a career. I'll go to university, I'll get a job, I'll do something normal. None of it ever worked, because once I'd experienced those things, there wasn't anything else I could do, really. So I was just sucked onto that path. But if I hadn't met those people, I probably wouldn't have carried on with this, because the systems themselves and the culture, the tradition, whatever you want to call it, don't inspire me particularly. They never have done. But the results for the people do, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. So from that point, you had met some people that were very influential, and you
Mm.
decided to travel the world and just go meet more of those people. Is that kind of how that unfolded?
Well, I didn't think that far ahead, actually. At the time, I didn't have any money, so traveling abroad wasn't particularly easy, I have to say. So I stayed with the first couple of teachers I met. One was called a guy, I should name them really. One was a guy called Shen Hongzun, who was incredibly interesting Chinese Qigong teacher, who's quite well known, I suppose, in the UK and around Europe. But then he passed away, and then by the time he passed away, I'd already traveled a little bit to kind of explore martial arts in Asia. But then once he was gone, yeah, there was even more reason to go hunting. So I got some money together through working horrible night shifts in a steelworks, and then I headed out to Asia to see what I could find. And the first few years were a bit empty, but then eventually I found alchemy. I found some alchemy teachers, and then some Nei Gong teachers, specifically people called like Wang Haitao and stuff like that I stayed with. But I never looked for the system. I feel like I should really highlight that. Like, I wouldn't have cared if I'd have met, do you know what I mean? If the teacher had been Zulu, I'd have studied that. I didn't care what it was. It could have been Native American. I really had no particular connection to a particular line. It was just that I guess I had a little bit more experience in Asian art, so therefore China made sense. That's where I headed. So I always hunted out the practitioner more than anything else. And then increasingly, as you go deeper and you learn more, you get introduced to more people, handshakes, introductions, and like I say, dead ends and blah blah blah. And that's kind of what I've been doing over the years, really, trying to get to the bottom of these arts. And I've come to realize that one of the most important things in these arts is the system, but equally as important is the presence, or what would you say, the direct assistance, perhaps, of somebody who's mastered that system as well. Like the system is, you need the teacher too, and so the
Yeah.
person effect was really major. So yeah, that's what I've been researching more than anything
Mhm.
else, which has taken a really long time, but it's been fun.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting the emphasis that you're placing on the role of the teacher because that's something that
Mm,
I also recently have really made contact with. I was telling you
mm,
before this
yeah.
that I was kind of like a spiritual mutt. I'd like listen to lectures and stuff, but it was really when I interacted and actually had a relationship with somebody who had exemplified the tradition I
Mm,
was going into and having somebody look at you and be able to like guide you very directly. It was like jet fuel. It was just such
mm.
a different tonal thing. Um,
It's
so yeah,
massive. Yeah, it's
it's
massive.
huge. And it's interesting because I find that here in the West, I talk to people a lot about my experiences and how important my teachers have been for me. And a lot of people have kind of an aversion against teachers. I think
Really?
we I at least specifically gurus, at least here in the
Ah,
States
yes.
is, there's just you always hear about like the shysters, like the
Sure.
people who abuse their power, but you never hear about like the hundreds or thousands of people who are operating in integrity and with good
Sure.
intention.
Yeah, yeah. I think there's a thing, isn't there, where all of us are frightened of being conned. I suppose, is that an inherent fear within all of us? We're frightened of an email after our sort of bank card details, all the way through to we're frightened of somebody making us join their cult or something like that. Or so I guess I can see it. What difference did it make to you? What did you feel, if you don't mind me asking? What did it do for your cultivation to have a live person? I'm curious if it's the same as my experience.
So the experience that I had, so it was during COVID, and I know that this probably might have an effect, but everything that I've done has been virtual. So I'm training
Okay.
in the
Yeah.
the Buddhist system, which is based on mindfulness, and I've
Hmm.
had a lot of interaction with my set of teachers at this point, and just having somebody be able to like look at your situation and be able to kind of speak to where you actually are, and having that receptivity, like saying like, here's what I'm struggling with in particular, and having them from a standpoint of having worked with that themselves be like, well, hey, here's some things to look out for, and now go have your practice with that in mind, and really empowering me to also trust myself. I think that that was a big thing, because there's a lot of, at least in my past, I'm always like tiptoeing because I don't really want to um just like overstep or like commit myself to like a wrong view, and
Sure.
having
Yeah.
somebody
Yeah.
be like, no,
Yeah.
you can trust your intuition, you can trust, by having these guidelines. And I don't know if that tracks to your experience, but
Yeah, yeah, completely. And that also sort of ties into that idea you were saying of a, what was the word you used? I liked it. A shyster. Sounds to me
yeah.
like the kind of word the sort of 1950s American gumshoe would use. I've not heard
Yep.
that word very much, but I like it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
like it sort of ties into a kind of shyster, would be that I think a part of the difference is that those kind of people often try to make you dependent upon them rather than enabling you to understand, okay, there's a set of guidelines and rules that we follow, of course. There's a system, a set of parameters are important, but you still have to be autonomous with regards to your training so that you're not disempowered by the practice. And that's quite a major distinction, I think, between teachers, certainly one that I saw when I was training.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and I
Mm.
would say the other thing about it was also just having somebody tell like exemplify and show you like this is possible, like this path is accessible, and like you in your confused neuroses can do this, 'Cause
Sure, sure,
sometimes
sure.
you can just like have that lack of faith, and it's like, how could I possibly be like one of these great people who are doing these amazing things, and just having them like, hey, I was there too.
Sure, yeah,
That
yeah.
was huge.
I think we also ignore sometimes the way that nervous systems interact a little bit as well, which is part of the problem with online tuition. And I'm aware that the irony of that is I teach online, but it's like nervous systems in people have this amazing plasticity, I always think. So if two people meet each other, there's like a harmonization of the two that takes place, and even a changing of the way the tissues line up and the way the energies, the magnetism of the body forms. So I think there's actually a transference of mastery through an art that has to happen person to person, because I don't think that can happen through Zoom or something. I'm not sure that's
Yeah.
going to happen, We can't
Yeah,
ignore
I
that.
agree.
The amazing abilities human have to replicate each other and to be influenced by each other is huge. It's absolutely huge,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think.
Yeah, and that's why I know in a lot of Eastern traditions, I mean, it is purely 100% you need a teacher. It's like
Mm.
all the books in the world will not replicate that experience of that transference, that transmissional quality of just being, communicating to being, you know.
Yeah, totally. Especially as a lot of the Chinese arts are very, they have a physical component to them as well. So I'm aware, you said you're in Buddhist traditions and Buddhist lines, and obviously there's many of them have a physical component for sure with regards to what they do in the body. But I would argue that sort of alchemy, Nei Gong, Taoist lines have a much higher degree of somatic or physical things because of the martial arts being connected to them and things like that. So I mean, as much as anything, the learning, especially in those kind of arts, is done hands on. It has to be. Uh,
Yeah.
it would be like you a massage therapist. You say you work as a body worker. I would imagine that when you were learning, you had a master level body worker get their hands on you, right? So that so that
Yep.
skill's almost sort of subconsciously transferred into your body when you're learning. I would guess. I would
Yeah.
suppose. Yeah.
100%. Yeah. It's interesting working with like other body workers that may have gone to different schools, and you could feel their teachers' effects on them just based on their view of the body. You can like they encode that into your nervous system. That's what I find it fascinating. It's like I gotta be careful with who I let like interface with my being. And again, that goes back to people's distrust, and we're very vulnerable and like squishy and malleable, so we want to make sure we only let the right
Sure.
people in, but
Yeah.
there still has to be like a gate to actually allow people to make that contact.
Hmm.
But
Yeah. Yeah.
you had mentioned a few times, and this is kind of the main thing I wanted to talk about was alchemy, right? So Neidan, you've used the term Nigong, which is part of the name of your school. I'm kind of curious with your story and everything that you have studied, all the different martial arts systems. Where does this idea of internal alchemy kind of nestle within the Taoist arts?
Hmm. Yeah. It's sometimes difficult to pin down. Actually, people will have different views on it. But I mean, the alchemy is the meditation system, or linked to the meditation system of Taoism. So people come from a Buddhist background probably find it easiest to equate with some of. It's kind of like the meditation mixed with some of the yogas of Vajrayana Buddhism. It's not the same, but you can kind of equate it to parallel kind of stages. So what I mean by that is there's subtle energy work, and then there's physical work, and then there's work with the magnetism and the electricity in the body, what we call yin and yang. And then on top of that, there's consciousness work with the meditation as well, which has similarities to most other Eastern meditation systems. So that's kind of core of it. And then all of the other arts, I would argue, are either subdivisions of alchemy, sort of came out of it. Like Neigong definitely comes from alchemy. It's like a derivative of that specializes in one area of alchemical practice and puts it into a more of a body-based system. And then Qigong is derived from it as well, as far as I can see. And then it influenced other arts like Tai Chi. So I don't know if Tai Chi came from alchemy, but it's definitely been influenced by it. I would say that Tai Chi is more of a Shaolin system that stole a bit of alchemy and chucked it all together to create something new. So that's how I see it. Historians might disagree because they have a very set time for when alchemy appears, but I don't believe them. I think when written records appear, is not the same as when something was started to be practiced within these ancient
Yep.
traditions. So for me, alchemy sits at the core of most of the Taoist lines these days. I think without alchemy, Taoism's difficult, like hard to understand. It becomes what? It becomes a philosophy. I don't know. So I think it's vital to the practice, and unfortunately, it's quite rare. I mean, Neidan's not that well known in the West. I don't think it's amazingly well known in Asia anymore because of obviously the Cultural Revolution and the persecution that practitioners went through. But it is having a resurgence. It's coming back as much as anything. But the majority of what I teach is Nei Gong, really, and then Neidan is generally what the seniors practice within my school.
Interesting. So you'd suggest if people were looking to study something like this, they'd start with Nei Gong. Is that kind of the traditional stepping stone that you'd?
Teachers will vary, but for me, yes. I think it's wise. I
Okay.
think especially if, you know, you're not 4 years old, born in a monastery or handed over to the monastery as a child or something and been sitting for hours every day. You've probably been walking around and standing up and using your body. So we generally start with Nei Gong because it's a bit more body based. I
Okay.
think it's easier. I think, there's stages of development you can do in alchemy that you can also do in Nei Gong and Qigong, but it's easier through Nei Gong and Qigong, so you may as well start there. That's my logic. I mean, if you can do certain stages in an easier way, you may as well. And then generally from there,
Yeah.
we guide somebody into alchemy, because I really think people should sort their bodies out as much as anything, and rather than worrying about merging with Tao at the beginning.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's my
I feel like
logic.
there'd be a
Tao
lot of,
later.
yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I think that, something that I recognize with Buddhism that kind of keeps getting hammered on, and I'm sure you probably have to deal with this too, is like the energy of maybe too much ambition or like wanting an outcome so much that it
Sure.
gets in the way of like it's very compelling. Like I can merge with the Tao. Like there's a thing where I can just be completely absorbed into, and it's like that enticing. It just kind of like fuels the desire
Sure.
mechanism, you know.
Well, that's another reason
So
for the
with
Qigong
with
and the Neigong. You can burn the desire out on the body based stuff. So by the time you get to the meditation,
Mhm.
hopefully you've worked through those layers. Hopefully,
Okay.
because you can't tell
Yeah.
someone to not be ambitious or driven, can you? Is that possible? I mean, teachers do, but
y-
it's not going to work. So they have to
Yeah.
burn it
Yeah.
out on something else.
Yeah. So would you say so like starting off with Qigong then, originally I wanted to talk about the more meditative, but if you're saying that this is kind of the entryway, what exactly what does that system kind of look like and what's its goal? Like the Qigong, the main thing that you teach. If you could distill it down into its base, like here's where we are, here's where you want to be, like what's
Sure.
that process look like?
Okay, I should try. I mean, ultimately, it is a
Yeah.
spiritual practice, meaning that it's aiming to unify with spirit. I mean, that's really what the definition of spiritual practice is to me, quite simply. Um, but I guess, what differs is a little bit is there's a sequential process that you need to go through. The logic being almost that you have to transform your body into a temple so that the spirit wants to reside within it. If you want to, is the metaphor imagery that's often used. So this is why we have to open the channel system and gather and thicken the body's energy, the chi as well, to prepare the system for such a thing. Because this might sound like a strange concept, but it's certainly a very sort of Taoist idea that what we call Shen or spirit, sort of connection to the divine, if you are given the grace to receive it, then there's two options. One, it hits you and it's a fleeting experience, meaning you're like, oh, I merged with all of the universe and I am nothing but unconditional love and I am one with Tao. And then by Wednesday, you're back to the schmuck you were before, like it didn't stay. So the idea is to try to prepare the body as much as anything so that it can anchor that experience and then retain that connection to spirit. So I would argue that the most important function of Neigong, maybe not important, the emphasis for Neigong is that really, to prepare the body system on a physical and a subtle level so that it can retain connection to spirit when you're at that stage.
Hmm. So what
That's
would
as
what would
succinct
you
as I can put it, I think.
I think that was great. Yeah. I'm kind of curious about like the unalchemized body and like what about it is unable to like maintain that connection to spirit. Like if it does somehow accidentally fall into this connection with the divine, like what about our system needs to be alchemized to fortify it? Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. It's a good question, and actually a tricky one. So off the top of my head, I mean, the terminology they use is obviously the channels need to be open, the body needs to be open. Okay, those are fairly inadequate, aren't they? They're concepts. But if I were to take it more literally, I would say that you have a physical body, physical version of you, nerves, cells, tissues, all of these kind of things. There's then a more subtle layer of your body, which is really the balance of yin and yang within the body. And then you have consciousness. That would be our three layers that we really sheaths, if you want to use more Hindu terminology, that we focus on within the body. So anything that happens at the level of consciousness or spirit has to be reflected within the energy system as well as the physical body as well. Like one can't change without the other. So what we do is we prepare the body by making sure that the yin and yang energies are as balanced as they can possibly be. And this is where all of the channel opening and building of Dan Tian and things like this come in. And this takes a long time, and we prepare it so that when that realization or that awakening happens from our meditative practice, that we're kind of not immediately slung shot out of it, you know. So the energy is there to ground or anchor that experience. And the funny thing is that with an awakening or enlightenment, there is an energetic component to it. There's an energetic patterning that happens. Hence the reason that teacher can have an aura that just kind of diffuses all of your defense mechanisms and makes you feel vulnerable. There's a radiance around them, you know. So that patterning we build into the body as much as we can so that it stabilizes the spiritual experiences, so that the jhanic states can be extended out, or union with Tao using Taoist terminology. So that's the logic behind it. And because the Taoists are mechanical, anally retentive nut jobs, they developed a whole sort of plethora of teachings around channel systems and circulations and da-da-da. And this is really where all of the kind of Qigong terminology comes in. It was like how to understand the workings of the subtle body so that it can anchor that experience. So I find that, well, I find it works. I mean, I'm not claiming to be anything more than an idiot, but certainly some of the people that I've trained with are beyond such a stage, and they've managed to anchor such experiences into their body. And a lot of the people I teach are meditators from other traditions, such as Buddhism. Lots of Theravadins where I am and teaching, particularly Theravadins, actually. Don't know why. Seems to be the ones who want to come, because they also recognize that the kind of bodywork or energy of Nei Gong can, once again, anchor their experience from their meditation into their body as well to stabilize it for longer. So
Yeah.
I think, did that answer your question? I hope so.
Oh yeah, that was perfect. Yeah. Yeah, so I'm curious about like someone comes to you, they don't have any spiritual underpinning. They're like they have this subtle sense like I need to develop something. Like what is the first thing that you do as a teacher to like guide them into this practice?
Okay, that's a good question too, huh? These are different. Well, firstly, I would say I don't normally get that kind of person, to be honest, because I think I have a reputation for attracting obsessives. So most of my work is to try to make people unobsessed, but I think like attracts like. So, you know, it's that kind of score. But when we do get those people come along and they come along to the score, I guess the other thing people are looking for is health as much as anything. So I also spend a lot of time teaching them, okay, how to work with your body, how to make your mind and your body as healthy as possible, which is a lot of what I do in the foundation stages. And generally what happens is they end up kind of getting sucked into the other stuff anyway, to be honest. That's where they end up.
Part of the
Um,
atmosphere. Yeah.
yeah, they end up going down there and they start hearing about this other stuff. And the next thing they know, they want to, unify with the Tao, I guess. Yeah.
Okay, so you start working with health, getting into like
Mm,
the Ni Gong, um, with that, I hear this term a lot, and you did just use it, and I know that it's like an essential component of pretty much all these systems, and I have like a
mm.
faint understanding of it, but that is the Dan Tian,
Okay.
and I know
Ah,
that there's
okay.
like it has something to do with your lower abdomen, but what exactly is this? Because from my understanding, it's like one of the fundamentals, right?
That's right, yeah. I mean, Dantian can refer to a few different things. So it can refer to a few locations in the body, or after a while, it can refer to a more qualitative aspect of the training. But at the beginning, I would normally assume people are talking about the lower dantian and the abdomen. That's usually what we say. If we don't specify differently, we're talking about that. But just because I know there'll be some Taoist scholars probably listen to this, that I know it does refer to other stages as well, but I'm specifically referring to the abdominal Dan Tian, which is where you need to start. Is that, to put it simply, the Dan Tian, it's a field that needs building in the lower abdominal space. So what we do is to put it simply, we increase the magnetism in the abdominal region of the body. So we have very specific methods to do this, so that essentially a magnetic field builds beneath the diaphragm and above the perineum. And this is yin qi. This is what we gather. We draw it in. So when it pulls in, it's a very physical, tangible, very, very clear, somatic, not imagination, not subtle experience of a magnet gripping a hold of your body and almost sort of turning you inside out a little bit. There's a huge amount of work that takes place down there. It's fairly easy to do. It's not difficult. You just have to know the method. And then people can do it very quickly. And this yin field, yin is said to be the container. And very much with the Dan Tian, what it does is it contains the other qi, which is yang qi, which is a kind of electrical energy that we send into that abdominal space to fill that container. So when they talk about packing the body with qi or filling it with qi, what they mean is to send electrical energy that we develop in the body down into the abdominal space, where it's stored within the magnetic field of the outer shell of the Dan Tian, and this is what we fill up. So it has to be done in sequence, because you can't send yang qi, what normal qi if you want, down to the abdomen unless there's something to contain it. So otherwise it just disappears, you know what I mean? Like it fades out. And when I started Qigong, with the first teachers I had, they were very good. I wouldn't speak negatively of them, but they were comparatively not, they weren't masters, and I think they would admit the same. Is that they were good with how to work the body. That's true, but they would also talk a lot about getting the qi into the Dan Tian, but of course there was no Dan Tian. So what was happening was any qi you did build was gone by the time you went to sleep. And sometimes, of course, all it did was hyperstimulate the nerves around the base of your body and made you sexually aroused or something like that, and then it was gone and it didn't serve any purpose. Normally you'd gone out and done something debaucherous over the weekend as a result of it, but nothing was being stored, and then it was only when someone showed me, okay, there's a way to actually generate this magnetism within the body that stores this qi, that I understand, okay, there's something more to this, and that's the Dan Tian. So the reason we do this is twofold. One is it organizes everything. You imagine like you got iron filings on a piece of paper, and I put a magnet underneath it, and they all kind of line up like you probably did at school or something at some stage. It does a very similar thing to much of the energy within your body. So it reorganizes various aspects of your nervous system and even the way the tissues are shaped. It gives birth to the internal body, which is a very specific way for the body to function. And then after that, it builds up more yang qi, which is like charging up a battery, essentially. And that gives us more energy to work with, so that we can access, I don't know if it's deeper, I don't know if it's up or down, maybe it's sideways, you know what I mean? But it just enables us to access different layers of our body system that would have been hard to access before. And that's how we open the channels. So that's what the Dan Tian is, certainly at the beginning anyway.
Interesting.
It's fun as well.
Yeah, it sounds pretty fascinating. Is there any risk of like, if you have maybe like a miscommunication from your teacher, or like, is there any potential harm? Like you're just collecting all this energy and like, if you don't handle that correctly, could you have an
Yeah.
adverse reaction?
Yeah, you can. I mean, most people when they're gathering, it's going to sound mean, most people when they're gathering qi, they don't have the Dan Tian anyway, so they're not going to store it. So the biggest risk they're going to get is one of two things. One, they'll either hyperstimulate the nervous system and go into a bit of sort of fight or flight response, something like that. Or the second reaction is they might get a bit of abdominal distension because the fascia can get quite tight around the intestines, which means they don't function quite so well. So you can swell a little bit. You can get minor things like that. And people call that qi belly, right? But often what it is a pot belly from the fascia not moving around your intestines. So you can get that. But more major things are more likely to happen. More major things are more likely to happen if you build the yang qi and send it into the nerves around your spine without having that field at the bottom properly anchored. That's probably the best way I can explain it. So a lot of the work, similar to Buddhism, around what do you call it, calm abiding, and things like this. These kind of mental qualities basically prevent that qi kind of hyper-stimulating the nerves as much as anything. Those are the kind of your main errors as much as anything. And then, of course, it can interact with recreational drug use, hallucinogenics, mental illness,
Mm.
things you would imagine as well. But there's more risky practices in Qigong than Dan Tian building, far more risky. Dan Tian building is quite safe compared to some of the others,
Yeah.
I would say.
Okay. So, at this point in like the developmental process, you have people working on just kind of like their general health. They're building their
Mm-hmm.
dantian. They're starting to slowly work their yang qi, moving it through the subtle channels of the body. Where do you typically, like, what is the development of that? Where does that go once you're like, oh, I'm actually like moving energy. I'm starting to feel a little bit better. Like, can you just hang out in that space, or what does that expand into?
It'd be nice if you could hang out in that space, Brett. That sounds really pleasant, actually. But no, unfortunately, with alchemy, there's a whole system that we work through. So one of the next parts of the body really is, I guess you could translate it in English as purging as much as anything. And there's a lot of work there, which sounds a bit sort of serious, doesn't it? Purging, but
It
actually,
does,
it's
yeah.
quite an entertaining. It's quite an entertaining part of the process. The body has to flush out things that it stores, because I think, as a body worker, I'm sure you know the body is amazing at storing all of the things we don't want it to store. It's quite good at that, really, isn't it? All of the
Yeah.
various things from our past. There's a whole history there, and of course, all of that stuff that's stored in the body. What it does is it causes the nerves to not function as well as they can, and the tissues to bind up, and the qi to not flow. So we have to get it all out. So the actual process of opening the channels and moving the qi and clearing out the blockages is quite a lengthy process, actually. It can take quite a while. But thankfully, there's quite a lot of exercises and things to do. So it's quite a varied part of the process. And I think for most people who want sort of health on an internal level, that's probably enough, actually. Like that's enough. Like you've got an amazing system for resetting and purging and clearing the mind and the body, and a lot of people kind of stay there and don't go much beyond it. And then only those people that really want to explore something deeper, I suppose, go further than that in alchemy, you know.
So,
But they have to have a sense of humor, because it can also be quite unpleasant, the purging process, because you can, your guts do crazy things and you get headaches and all kinds of crazy things while the body purges out. It's just like when you've had a really deep tissue massage and you have you get those weird bodily reactions some people do, don't they, when they get sort of halitosis and sweaty and all that kind of stuff.
yeah.
Similar things can happen from Neigong as well.
Interesting. So we're not just talking about like an emotional purging, but there's like a physical component where you're having like physiological
Yeah,
like
totally. Yeah.
responses.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah, yeah.
Okay.
It's heavy. It's a heavy, heavy process. Yeah. You can go into it gently, but no, it goes deep. I mean, ultimately it's a transformational system linked to spiritual practice, right? So by its very nature, it's going to be heavy, because I believe that, rightly or wrongly, I believe that connection to spirit is the hardest endeavor a human being will ever do. I think it simply is the most difficult thing for a human being, which is why so few ever manage a full connection to it. I mean, I personally think you've got more chance of making it in Hollywood, as a top actor, than you do of achieving a full realization or awakening. It's that difficult. So therefore, the preparatory work of opening the channels and moving the chi, by its very nature, is going to be quite deep. It's going to go quite deep.
Yeah. It seems like, it by function is going to have to ask a lot of you because I mean, it's just kind of it's really only for those who are like the most ardent and serious about undertaking that kind of journey. So it's like all those threshold guardians that you have to kind of pass in order to like kind
Totally, yeah.
of make yourself worthy or whatever.
I think you have to be adventurous. That's what I
Yeah.
see as the key quality, because I think human beings are more resilient than they think they are. There's an air of fragility that I think a lot of people have, that they view with themselves. And actually, I don't think people are that fragile. Not really. I just think they're convinced they are. So I think that their bodies can take it, their minds can take it, they can take it, but they have to be adventurous and have a good sense of humor, because sometimes it's not always the most pleasant process. Not always the most
Yeah.
pleasant, but we have a laugh while we're doing it, for sure.
Yeah. I think that's like the hallmark of like most accomplished spiritual people. Like a lot of people get this like idea of people in like white robes who are very just kind of like calm, but like every
Yes.
person I've met who has any degree of attainment or realization is that they're funny as hell. Like they're just playing with the situation as it arises, and that like spontaneous nature has always just really inspired me. That's been a part of the transmissional quality I've gotten from
Mm.
my teachers, is that it's not this like super like uptight like
Mhm.
austere thing. It's always like we're just riffing and playing, and there's just this like exchange happening that just feels really honest.
Yeah, I agree. Never trust a serious spiritual practitioner, because
Yeah.
if they haven't seen through the great joke, at least of themselves, and found it really funny, then I'd be concerned. Actually, yeah,
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
I would agree with your experience. All of the practitioners I would hold in great esteem. Yeah, yeah, they're jovial, light-hearted people that are confused at how seriously other people take life. I think,
Yeah.
if I were to summarize how they are, more than
Yeah.
anything else. That gets me in trouble, though.
So,
I mean, at the same time, people who don't know me see me from the outside. It's amazing how many teachers don't like the irreverence to my approach to these arts, and the fact that I think something can be held as sacred in your soul and in your heart, but it doesn't have to be expressed verbally as something sacred. And I don't have to pretend to be sacred. And I don't have to sit a certain way or stand a certain way or speak a certain way. It's not related to how you feel on the inside. And I think that's an important thing for people to try to realize in these arts.
I love that. Yeah, for me, it kind of feels like a skillful means to treat it in a way externally that's like a little bit more lighthearted, because I find it
Mm.
to be more accessible. And it's like if you really cherish the thing that you're practicing, you want to be able to share it with people. And there's a certain karmic situations where people are going to be really adverse to just like
Yes.
religiosity. I think that a lot of people, at least in my country or my age group, there's a kind of a throwing away of religious
Mm.
traditions and
Yes.
institution, which people sadly lump spirituality into. They haven't found the way to like separate those two realities.
Yeah, and I think as well. I mean, actually, on that note, a little controversial is I think that's a little bit of a mistake for people to throw away the religion as they do. I think it's a bit of throwing the baby out with the bathwater because, of course, within any religion, there's a huge amount of amazing truth contained within them as well. It's just that the witch burnings were a bit depressing and all that, weren't they? But there's a core within those arts that I do think it's a shame that people instantly rebel against them. But I get it. I do get it. But I think with regards to humor as well, and how you are, like as a teacher, what kind of relationship are you going to have with the people you teach? Because you can either be what, a father figure, like as a male anyway. When we going to be a surrogate father figure, that sounds like a pain in the ass. I mean, I don't have my own kids. I don't have experience
Yeah.
of doing that. And then those students are just going to overlay all of their father issues onto me and end up resenting me. So that's no good. And then what can I do? I could play the wise master. Well, that's no good because I'm an idiot. So I can't do that. And they'll see through it. It's a pretense, and people do see through it. So then the only other option you're left is to be friends. That's it. I mean, and it's amazing how many people have told me, no, 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 you need better boundaries. Why? Why can't I just be friends? It's more like a long-term friendly relationship, and I help you through this process. And how do you communicate with your friends? You sense of humor. I mean, that's what people do when they get together. They laugh and they joke, and they grow together as a group through what's essentially a positive emotional connection. And that's why I think that teachers should express that themselves. Because while a teacher has to be able to hold a certain degree of authority through their expertise within a space, you still have to relate to people, and you're going to have to find
Yeah.
a healthy way to do it. And people always learn. They learn better that way. They learn better that way for sure,
Yeah.
even if you don't always understand the sense of humor of every country.
Yep.
I've
Yeah.
got myself in
Yeah.
trouble in America with that before, for sure. Your sense of
Yeah.
humor is
Yeah. We're
very
kind of
different.
going.
It's
Yes,
very
we're kind of
different.
going through like a cultural situation right now where we're really questioning like what is safe and acceptable socially to joke about. And if you say
Yes,
the wrong thing, then you're
I've
out,
gathered.
and then people are going to let you know how out you are.
Yeah, it used to be when I first came to America 10 years ago, you couldn't talk about religion, just that, I think. Actually, that was the taboo subject. And then increasingly that list has got bigger over the years. And on the last trip to America, I realized that it was like 90% of the things I find interesting I couldn't speak about because people were very volatile. I do hope that relaxes. I really do, because America has an amazing culture, very different from Europe and very amazing. But it's all a bit tense at the moment. They could do with chilling
Yeah.
out. They all need
Yeah.
a holiday. You all need a holiday in America. I
I agree. Yeah, that might be the name of this episode is we just need a holiday.
think so. That's my advice. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I kind of wanted to double back to this idea of connecting to spirit because for me,
Sure.
yeah, as somebody who is, really immersed in like the Buddhist situation where they kind of talk about the inherence of Buddha nature and how it's like you cannot be separated from it. And it's more a
Mm.
process of like uncovering the sun behind the clouds. There's like
Yes.
a unalienable connection there. But I don't really know too much about like the Taoist system, and I know Christianity kind of also has this kind of you have to like move toward, and there's like a union. So I'm kind of curious in the Taoist system, what is referred to as spirit, and like what's the relationship between spirit and I guess again I don't know if this is a term that's used, but ego or self or our limited where we are now.
It's not all that different from other spiritual traditions with regards to their view. So the idea being that, I mean, okay. So one thing that is different, I suppose, actually, within Taoism, we would talk about, if I convert it to English terms, a difference between, material self and mind. Okay, we have all of that. What you might call the ego or our self-perception. We have that, but then we have the soul as well, which is what sometimes differs us from some Buddhist lines, is that there is that as well, and then that it becomes a stepping stone towards spirit. So we have these kind of three aspects of ourselves. So part of the key importance, really, with regards to that side of Taoism, is to understand that the true self is the soul. That's really what it is. So a lot of our work is to reverse the light, as they say, and return our awareness to an ability to understand what the soul is. And most of our teachings, and I think many Taoists wouldn't necessarily agree with this, but to me, most of the core tenets of Taoism with regards to things like Wu Wei, Ziran, phrases people would hear as core ideas, are to help you understand the nature of the soul, which is your true self. Once there is absorption into that, then gradually what it can start to do is merge back towards spirit, with similar to what you're saying, it's always been there, it's always been at the core of who we are. It's just that rather than being masked like clouds over the sun, maybe it'd be easier from our perspective to think of it as like you're orientated according to the wrong thing. So your true self is using the what you might call the ego, if you want, the red dust, the layers of who you are, to orientate itself in the wrong direction. So it's seeing itself in the wrong way. It's not seeing truth. It's not seeing what it is. So most of the meditative work is to get us to get out of that so that we can learn to see the self for what it truly is. And then that's when the soul is contacted, radiated through the body. And that becomes a bridge towards spirit after that, unification with the divine. I don't say the Tao, actually, because the Tao is a more complicated term, but for a bridge over towards connection with the divine, with spirit itself. That's not that different from some other meditation systems. It's just maybe their emphasis, what they put weight on is a little different from some others,
Mm.
I would
Is,
say.
Thanks for that. Is there a something
No.
within the system that has explained how we've become misidentified? Because I know like Buddhism has this whole like Abhidharma teaching of how we
Mm.
kind of attach ourselves to certain things that so like what is there like an origin story to I guess confusion or whatever the appropriate term for that is?
Yeah, I mean, Taoism's pretty old and quite, what would you call it? There's a lot of different components coming to it. It's quite eclectic with regards to its history. So a lot of old shamanistic and sort of pantheistic beliefs and things kind of connected into it too. So it depends how far you want to go back. They have everything from creation myths of the human species through to direct meditation teachings. But their view would simply be that a part of the role of human beings when they come onto this earth and they're born is that they're supposed to essentially accrue knowledge. And part of the accruing of knowledge is what separates them from the understanding of true self. You can go back into sort of, cosmological or mythical reasons, but I don't think they matter. Like, I don't think they, I mean, like it becomes an exploration of things for the sake of it. Like, you're never going to know for sure. It'll just become opinions. So what we tend to do is try to understand, well, what was the natural process that caused fabricated mind, dualistic mind to form around our true self? And that's what we try to change. That's what we call returning to the source, or going back to being like a child to get back to it. A lot of Chinese medicine's based on that, like Chinese medicine theory grew out of alchemical theory and as much as anything. And a lot of that is the kind of explanation of the accruing of the untrue self around the soul. And then all they do is they overlay that model onto the physical body and created Chinese medicine as much as anything. So yeah, it's quite complex. What do you think?
Yeah.
Why are we here, Brett? What are
Oh,
we doing on this
yeah.
planet? Why are you here?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I always at this point, my answers changed pretty much every 6 months at
Okay.
this point. But like leaning into like the Buddhist system is that it was all just like a mistaken identity. And I mean, this is kind of maybe the biggest distinction is within Buddhism they have the teaching of anatman, which is not self.
Mm-hmm.
So this idea
Mm-hmm.
that we're actually a bunch of smaller individual energy packets coming together, and we create this illusion that we are this
Mm-hmm.
coherent stable thing, and it's actually the attachment to the idea that we are one finite fixed thing that actually
Mm-hmm.
perpetuates that cycle of confusion and identification. So whether or not that's what it is, I mean, that's my working basis right now is just kind of experiencing how
Sure.
that seeps into my day-to-day lived experience and my own stuckness and my own like, ooh, I want that. Ooh, I don't want that. I'm gonna ignore that, and just using that as a nexus to just really contact, just like, oh, that's like the raw situation of where I'm at or
Mm-hmm.
wherever this
Sure.
is, you know.
Yeah,
Is
yeah,
that
yeah.
does that track?
I would agree with that for sure. I would agree with that for sure. I mean, it's also I mean, it's a funny thing with all of these traditions is that to know the truth of the nature of humans, or why we're here, or who we are, what we are, is probably more important than why we are. I think to know the
Yeah.
truth of
Yeah.
that, it can only be found by looking inside. There is nothing else you can do. It's only about reversing awareness until it becomes aware of itself, ultimately on the inside. And when awareness is aware of itself, then it can go, oh, shit, that's what I am. Like that realization can arise. But there is nothing else. There's nothing else to do, because anything else apart from awareness, paying attention to awareness, becomes looking outside. That's all you can do, or fabrication of something else. So all of these traditions, on that level, that part of it, have to be the same. Because say I'm going to I'm going to become aware of myself by banging a gong, carrying out a ritual, visiting a temple, sliding my mala beads through my thumb, or something like that. All of those are external things. They're all external. They're all outer shell trimming things. So they might help me in some way, but they're still not orientating me towards awareness, becoming aware of what it is. It can't show me the truth of who I am. It's impossible
Yeah.
to know who you are by looking outside, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It can't happen.
Yeah. I think one of the most important teachings that I've received, and it was one of my very first ones while getting on the path, was that of spiritual materialism. And it's kind of
Okay.
what you're describing. I don't know if you're familiar with this at all, But
A little bit. Is it Pema Chodron's writings? Did you write about this? Is that?
so her teacher is my teacher's teacher, so
Yeah.
Chogyam Trungpa, and he came to the West. He's largely responsible for bringing Tibetan Buddhism to the West and meditation, and
Hmm.
he recognized a need to talk about this because it was so prevalent back in the 70s, because spirituality was really booming on the scene. The hippie movement was in full swing, and what he
Hmm.
recognized is a lot of people using spirituality as a means to reinforce their sense of identity and like kind of just like
Sure.
have like window dressing. So he,
Hmm.
he like dedicated a huge part of his career to really pointing this out of how ego does all these external things and goes to these exotic practices and wears the right clothes and talks a certain way, and we identify as spiritual people, but that doesn't actually teach awareness to look at awareness like you're saying. So it's like calling that out so that it can show people like that's you can connect to the awareness underneath that.
Hmm.
And like recognizing that within my own practice, I was like, as a spiritual mutt for 10 years, so to speak, that's like all I did was just like relate with things externally and then like regurgitate, repeat, rather than
Sure.
contacting the actual quality of awareness. And I think that that's kind of, I have some mala beads right there from that time. So
Sorry, I wasn't calling out your mala beads. I apologize.
no, no,
Yeah,
please call it out. That's part of
I
it.
mean, you call yourself a spiritual mutt, and you. But I would say that even somebody, I was never a spiritual mutt apart from when I was very young. I was always a bit more the other way, a bit more orthodox, I suppose, or a fundamentalist, if you like, I suppose, within these traditions in some ways. But it still created the same problem. Fundamentalist or spiritual mutt, you're still attached to the trimmings, and I think that the trimmings, the purpose they serve with regards to, if you exclude channels, exclude energy, and we're only talking about the mind, the way I see it is, look, when you're looking inside, by its very nature, you're going to use the mind in some way. We might try not to. We might try to eradicate it. We might try to see through it. But you are going to be using the mind because you're turning it around. It's inevitable. So the mind can have all kinds of different parameters and qualities involved in it. So all of the trimmings, the things that people are attaching to, maybe what your teacher's teacher is
With the
calling,
grand teacher.
the grand teacher is calling
Yeah.
spiritual materialism, as
Yeah.
much as anything, are the things that we should be using to change the parameters or quality of the mind so that when it looks at awareness or when it pays attention on the inside, it sees it correctly. Because an untrained mind that doesn't have any of those qualities is not going to see awareness for what it is. So most of the training to me in meditation is you're sharpening the tools. That's it. But you're not using the tool, if you get what I mean. Like the training is to create the tool, but you eventually have to use it yourself to find that attention, that awareness on the inside. And that's what takes time. If you could get the
Yeah.
tool perfect, you could do it like that. Boom. You know what I mean? There's me. Boom. There
Yeah.
we go. Connection to soul, connection to spirit, whatever you want. I've seen through the illusion of self, but unfortunately, the tool is a bit rusty. So we
Yeah.
have to work on it.
Yeah. So I'm curious about this phrase, and I think it was my grand teacher that said it, because he
Okay.
was asked, and I'm not trying to poke or prod too much, but I think it is an
Hmm.
interesting. It was very provocative when I heard it, but he was talking about
Okay.
body-based systems as well. Because
Hmm.
he was like shamatha vipassana. That's all you need. Like that's it.
Sure. Yeah.
And for him, he was known for saying that like you experience the body through the mind. So why
Hmm.
not just cut out the middleman and just work with the mind? And I'm just
Hmm.
curious for someone like you to hear something like that and what your response would be.
I agree. If you can do it, if you can do it,
Yeah,
you completely. But I don't think people can. I've not seen it. My
yeah,
direct experience would show me that it's very, very rare for that to be the case. Because think of it this way, right? If the day's 24 hours long, and then you're asleep for 8 of those maybe, so you're up for 16. So what are you spending the majority of your time doing? Well, you're using your body, you're living in your body, and you're feeding your body, and you're walking around, and your body hurts, and then your body's tired, and then your body feels good. It's like a complete somatic experience at all times. So then you go and meditate for an hour a day, 2 hours a day, 4 hours a day. Well, that's 4 hours. Say we're a really good meditator. Well, that's still 12 hours where you're using your body at all times. So do you know what I mean? Like what you do the most of the time is going to be dominant. So I think that Buddhist teachings, and please don't get me wrong, because I'm actually within a Buddhist tradition as well. It's less known. I'm more known for my Taoist connections, but I'm also in a Buddhist line as well. And I'm a great fan of it. But the problem I see I could also give you the problem with Taoism afterwards, but the problem I see with Buddhism is the teachings are designed for people that are spending way more than half of those 16 hours sat in meditation. Do you know what I mean? So that's their default state. So if that's their default state, they're spending more time working with the mind than they are with the body. So therefore, body-based practices do seem kind of pointless. You may as well develop stabilization of awareness until insight arises, and then you can see through the illusion of self to achieve, awakening. But I don't live like that. And I don't think most people live like that either. So I think we have this added hurdle of the body. And I don't know I wouldn't want to comment on individuals, but I do think that when the Buddhists came over to the West, 70s, 80s, even some in the 90s that I met, is they came from temples or monasteries. They came from lives where they lived like that. So sometimes we have to recognize the teachings don't necessarily match the people.
Yeah.
That well. So I think that's the biggest hurdle with that. But if your body was perfectly sorted, I agree. Just go straight to the mind.
Yeah. Well, I love that. Yeah, it's hard to integrate these things, and I think that's the
Mm.
hallmark of like a successful and effective system is like again, most of these people spend all their lives in monasteries. They're unplugged from the fact that like we as modern folks like we have bills to pay, we have like houses to maintain and relationships that
Yeah.
are sometimes chaotic and unpredictable and like I really appreciate systems that include that and use that as the practice material also.
I would also say as well, if you don't mind me being a little controversial, but
I love it.
I've spent a lot of time around monks and gurus of different traditions, and many that have said that similar thing with the mind. And I will say that a lot of them actually fell into debauchery of the body at later stages in their life, which almost kind of discounted what they were saying in the first place a little bit. And I sometimes wonder if they'd have regulated their nervous system and their bodies and their somatic physical desires, would such things have happened when they went deeper into their mental work? I think maybe it would have protected against it a little bit.
Yeah.
Because the counter is that Taoism's problem is quite often it's over-focused on the body. So it devolves into sexual practices and irrelevances like that as much as anything. So they get the balance wrong the other way, I think.
Yeah.
It's, somewhere in the middle. Isn't the middle path important? I think someone said it.
Somebody did. Yeah, I'm not sure who,
Somebody
but
did. Huh.
that's
Yeah,
something that I kind of struggle with a little bit. It comes in waves. I cannot deny the influence that my grand teacher's teachings have had on me. I love that
sure.
term, but at the same time, I don't know if you know anything about him. So he came over in the West
A little
in
bit.
the
Yeah.
70s, and yeah, he was very debaucherous. He actually
Mm.
drank very heavily. He slept with a lot of students. There's like other potential abuses. But, like, the thing about it was that he was always apparently very clear and he was never deceptive about it. But it still is like one of those questions, because he exemplified the crazy wisdom tradition, which is
Mm.
a part of like the Kagyu school, which is like these really enlightened people who just like act kind of sporadically and it's all to like wake you up because they're tantric. And that's something that I struggle with in terms of like appropriating, is it's like that would not fly today. I mean, maybe back in the 70s, there's more space, but it's just like y- I can't deny that a lot of this has been really effective and helpful. But at the same time, it's like you look at his behavior and it's like, we're not going to emulate that, but where does that affect what they're saying? You know?
Well, I do have an opinion on it, but it's a little damning in that I think that the caveat before I give my opinion is that people are people, and humans are fallible, and it doesn't matter what level somebody at, they still have a human body and a human mind. But at the same time, that's what the moral and ethical code is supposed to be for, to prevent that from happening. So even if you aren't at the stage where, no desires are ever going to arise, it doesn't matter, because the desire should meet the firewall of your ethical and moral code, which should be built into your system, which is a part of the reason why the people that are always at the biggest risk of falling foul of that are the one at the top of the pile, because the person at the top of the pile doesn't have anybody supervising them, which is a very dangerous position to be in, which is why you should never be in that position unless you feel you are almost unhuman in your approach to life. I personally would never like to be in a position where I don't have people who are senior to me judging my behavior and pulling me up on what I'm doing. And I think somebody like some of the Buddhist or Hindu teachers got to a position where they didn't have any overseers. But that being said, there's the other side to it as well, that I think that often people will justify it by saying it's a teaching. I've seen that many, many times. It's like, oh, he smokes cigarettes to teach us a lesson about not being overly attached to our health. And it's like, no, he just likes cigarettes. Like it's amazing how we project these things. It's like I drink cocktails and things like that. And I'm certainly not an alcoholic. I probably drink once a week, once every 2 weeks or something, but I'll have a couple of cocktails. I live in the tropics. Like, what else are you going to do? And it's amazing the amount of people who I teach will kind of think one of two things. They'll either think I'm trying to teach them some kind of spiritual lesson, which I'm not. I just like having a cocktail on the weekend when I've had a hard week. Or they think that I'm impure in some way, so I'm not capable of passing any methods on to them. And that might be true. Maybe I'm too impure to teach you the direct, enlightened path, but it's okay because I'm not enlightened, so it would be hypocrisy anyway. But it's all of these, there's like so much projection and confusing within that. And personally, I just think that bad behavior is bad behavior, whoever you are.
Yeah.
I think it's that simple.
Yeah. I agree with you that I don't think that bad behavior is a teaching in itself, but I think that there is something about the idea of like our ideas of what purity is and like what a spiritual person manifests as, because it would be
Mm-hmm.
hard to deny, with a lot of these big teachers that there's some level of accomplishment. There's some sense of gravity and power where they've attracted thousands of people who are like intently dedicating themselves. So it's like there's something happening there, but whether or not that equates to like purity, we just have this idea. Like any of your students who like, oh, he's drinking a cocktail, like that's not what I think of
Yeah,
spiritual people, so I'm gonna peace out. So like in that there almost like is an indirect teaching that you shouldn't use to justify bad behavior, but it
totally.
just
I,
it
I
just
would
it's
I would expect my entire school to walk away from me, and they must, if ever I did something highly unethical or immoral. Though that would be an expectation. So if I started, whatever, abusing people physically, psychologically, whatever, I don't know, like on the scale of some of these yoga teachers or something, I would expect the whole school to walk away from me, and I would be offended by their lack of discernment if they didn't actually.
yeah, yeah,
So I would defend certain behaviors, I'll be honest, but not others. But then also like
yeah,
attainment and skill and moral or personal cultivation are not always the same thing. I've met some
yeah.
very skillful assholes. And oh, sorry, I hope you can swear on your show. I
Yeah,
apologize. I
100%.
didn't
Yeah,
ask. Okay, right.
yeah,
So I've met some very skillful assholes, and I've met some very decent people that have no skill. So that they're not necessarily
yeah.
correlative with one another either. Unfortunately, it'd be nice if they were, but it's yeah, it's not the case.
Yeah. Well, that's something we all got to find our way through, I guess.
Yeah,
So, yeah,
yeah.
it looks like we are at time. This went by pretty dang quick.
Oh,
Um,
sure. Okay.
yeah. So, I'm curious before we go, if people
Hmm.
are vibing with what you're putting down, how can they interact with you? How can they plug into your teachings?
Oh, yeah. People can find me. I don't. I have a rule of not. I don't advertise things.
No
I
plugs. Okay.
No, no, no. I come on because I like having a chat and chat with new people and things. If they want to find me, they can look me up on Google. I'm around. I do stuff.
Love that. Wow, that was very humble.
Oh, well, yeah. I don't know. I'm busy enough.
Yeah. Oh, that's real. Yeah. Awesome. Well, Damo, thank you so much for your time in this crazy time of your life of moving and stuff. I really appreciate sharing space and getting to know you.
Oh, it's really nice. Thank you very much, Brett. Thanks for having me on. I like your lounge, by the way. I like your design
Thanks.
style there. It's good.
Yeah, appreciate it. My roommate does these.
Oh,
She
okay,
is
cool.
amazing, just absolutely amazing.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I
So,
was admiring that tree.
all
Yeah,
right.
well, thank you very much.
Yeah, of course. All right. We will see you soon.
Yeah, take it easy.
Yep. All right, everybody, that was the episode. Thank you so much for listening all the way through until the end. Once again, that was Damo Mitchell. If you want to plug into his online teachings, head on over to lotusneigong.com. He has a lot of virtual offerings to get you started on your Nei Gong journey. I really encourage you to also check out his social media because he's got a lot of free musings that I find to be enriching and just a good part of my social media diet. So thank you again so much. If you want to support this show, you can head on over to Apple Podcasts, leave us a review. You can rate us on Spotify, follow us on all the channels. YouTube subscriptions are also huge. I also have a Patreon, patreon.com/21st Century Vitalism. Or if you are bold enough to leave me a one-time donation, head on over to Venmo. And my name is Brett-Kane-1. You'll see the logo there. So no worries if it's the right or wrong one. It should be pretty easy. We will be coming back at you in 2 weeks with a new episode. So thank you so much. We will see you soon.